Keanu Reeves was driving through a quiet neighborhood when flashing lights appeared behind him. What the police found inside his car didn't just shock them. It threatened to expose a secret mission that could change lives forever. Could a simple traffic stop destroy the hope he was trying to deliver? Watch to discover what happened next. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The clock on the kitchen wall read 9:40 p.m., casting a soft glow over the small, modest home where Keanu Reeves was quietly preparing for what had become a deeply personal mission. Despite being one of the most recognized faces in the world, Keanu's nightly routine was a secret few knew about, hidden from the flashing cameras, adoring fans, and even many close friends. Tonight was no different. He moved deliberately, focused on packing the last of the supplies for his weekly drive to help homeless people scattered throughout Los Angeles. The evening had already been delayed. Earlier, a last-minute call with his charity's coordinator had kept him at the kitchen table longer than planned. They spoke urgently about a shipment of medical supplies that needed to be sorted and delivered immediately. Keanu listened carefully, his calm voice giving clear directions, ensuring everything would be ready on time. That call had cost him precious minutes. Now, with the packages stacked on the kitchen counter, he felt the weight of those lost moments pressing against him. In the quiet of the evening, the sounds of the city seemed distant, soft hums of traffic far away, the occasional bark of a dog, the rustle of palm fronds in a gentle breeze. Inside the house, Keanu moved with careful purpose. Each package had been wrapped neatly, labeled with handwritten notes, blankets folded tightly, food cans arranged in boxes, hygiene kits packed with toothpaste, soap, and sanitary wipes. He paused at each bundle, his fingers brushing over the paper with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the care he put into this work. This was no ordinary delivery. It was a lifeline for people many wanted to ignore. Over the past 6 months, Keanu had become more than an actor to these individuals. He had become a quiet source of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, someone cared. The packages were more than just supplies. They were messages of dignity, survival, and respect. He looked over the list once more, confirming the names and locations he planned to visit. Some were veterans, others struggling with illness or addiction. Each person was more than a statistic. They were stories, lives intertwined with hardship and resilience. Keanu had learned their names, their needs, and in many cases had shared moments of conversation that touched him deeply. The mission had become personal, a way to connect beyond fame and spotlight. Now, as he lifted the final box onto the counter, Keanu felt a quiet urgency. The night was already slipping away, and there was a long drive ahead. He moved toward the garage, the packages cradled carefully in his arms, ready to be loaded into the back seat and trunk of his modest SUV. Keanu's vehicle was unassuming, a simple black SUV with no flashy decals or markings. It blended seamlessly into the night, a stark contrast to the bright lights and red carpets that often followed him. Tonight, that was exactly how he wanted it. No attention, no distractions. Just the road ahead and the people waiting for help. He opened the trunk and carefully arranged the packages inside. Each box fit snugly next to the others, creating a mosaic of hope and necessity. The back seat was next, filled with bundles wrapped tightly to protect their fragile contents. Keanu paused after placing the last item, taking a moment to adjust a small, worn note taped to one of the boxes. It read simply, "For Harold, stay strong, you are not forgotten." Harold was a veteran Keanu had met months earlier. He was one of the many souls who had touched Keanu's heart, and the promise of delivering that package weighed heavily on his mind. The personal notes were his way of bridging the distance that often separated those living on the streets from the rest of society. They were reminders that these people mattered. Closing the trunk, Keanu climbed into the driver's seat and took a deep breath. The familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility settled in his chest. This drive wasn't just about delivering supplies. It was about affirming dignity, about standing with people when the world seemed to turn its back. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:55 p.m. Time to go. As he pulled out of the driveway, the city's glowing skyline appeared on the horizon. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby ocean, mixed with the faint aroma of street food vendors packing up for the evening. Keanu navigated the quiet streets with practiced ease, his mind already focused on the stops ahead. Despite the calm exterior, a knot of tension had formed inside him. Recent weeks had brought increased police presence in the neighborhoods he frequented. Patrol cars were now a common sight where they had once been rare. Keanu had learned to move carefully, mindful of the delicate balance between offering help and avoiding interference with law enforcement. Tonight felt different. The quiet streets seemed watchful. His rearview mirror reflected several police cars stationed at key intersections, their blue and red lights muted but unmistakable. He wondered if someone had noticed his unusual activity, or if the increased patrols were part of a larger effort to crack down on unauthorized presence in these areas. The thought unsettled him. If his mission was misunderstood, the people depending on his help might be forced to scatter or hide. Trust, once built slowly and carefully, could be shattered. Keanu's heart ached at the possibility. Still, he pressed forward, the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. He reminded himself why he was doing this. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because no one else seemed willing to step into the shadows where help was desperately needed. The drive through the quiet neighborhoods felt heavier tonight. Streetlights flickered softly, casting long shadows over empty sidewalks and closed storefronts. Keanu's eyes stayed sharp, scanning for the small signs he had come to know. An old car parked under a tree, a cluster of worn blankets folded near a bench, or the faint flicker of a campfire hidden behind bushes. Each stop represented a fragile thread in a larger web of lives he was quietly trying to support. His first destination was near a small park on the edge of downtown. Harold, a veteran with a gentle smile and a stubborn spirit, often parked his aging car there to find a few hours of rest. Keanu thought about the many conversations they'd shared, stories of battlefields overseas, nights spent fighting internal wars with pain and loneliness. Harold's struggles had become emblematic of the countless forgotten people who survived day to day against overwhelming odds. This wasn't just a delivery. For Keanu, bringing Harold a carefully packed box of supplies was an act of respect and friendship. It was a way of saying, "You're not invisible, you're not forgotten." The notes he tucked inside the packages carried words of encouragement, written in moments stolen between the chaos of public life and private mission. As the SUV rolled slowly down the street toward the park, a familiar knot of anticipation settled in Keanu's chest. These trips had become a ritual, a blend of hope, responsibility, and urgency. He knew how unforgiving the night could be for those without shelter, especially when temperatures dropped or when the city's relentless hum quieted to a chilling silence. But just as he prepared to turn onto the narrow lane leading to Harold's usual spot, an unexpected flash caught his eye in the rearview mirror. The blue and red emergency lights of a police cruiser blazed suddenly, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Keanu's heart jumped. It was a traffic stop, simple in theory but full of uncertainty. A surge of questions flooded his mind. Would the officers understand the purpose of his cargo? Would this delay jeopardize the fragile trust he'd built? More than anything, he feared that his mission, meant to offer solace, might be mistaken for something suspicious, even criminal. He pulled over slowly, hands steady on the wheel, but his mind racing. Every detail of this encounter felt critical. This was more than just a routine stop. It was a test. The packages in his back seat and trunk weren't just boxes. They were hope wrapped in brown paper. lifelines for people battling hardship. The police officer approached with measured steps, the quiet tension between them palpable. In that moment, the familiar world of fame and film vanished. Keanu was just a man, a driver, and a bearer of secrets that the city's streets desperately needed but rarely recognized. This traffic stop would become the defining moment of his mission, challenging perceptions, exposing vulnerability, and revealing a side of Keanu Reeves that the world had rarely seen. What the officers found inside the car would stun them, and what happened next would change everything. Not just for Keanu, but for the people counting on him to be their quiet guardian through the night. Keanu eased his SUV back onto the dimly lit streets, the city's quiet hum settling around him like a blanket. The neighborhoods ahead were familiar, the hidden corners and tucked-away alleys where the city's homeless had found temporary shelter. Over time, Keanu had learned the rhythms of these streets, the safe spots and the places to avoid. This was his world now, far removed from red carpets and flashing cameras. But tonight something felt different. The usual stillness carried an undercurrent of watchfulness. As Keanu drove slowly through the residential blocks, he noticed a marked increase in police patrols. Cars were stationed at corners where they rarely lingered before. Officers stood on street corners, eyes scanning, their postures alert and purposeful. It was an unusual level of vigilance for this part of town. Keanu's heart tightened with concern. The presence of so many officers hinted at a police operation or heightened enforcement efforts. He wondered what might have triggered this increase in patrols. Was there a new crackdown on the homeless? Were there complaints from residents? Or worse, had his own quiet mission drawn unwanted attention? The tension in the air was almost tangible. Every intersection seemed watched, every shadow seemed to hide more than just darkness. Keanu instinctively slowed the vehicle, careful not to attract attention, but also alert to the possibility that those he intended to help might have been displaced or forced to move elsewhere. His mind raced with worries about the fragile balance he had to maintain between offering aid and respecting the law. He thought about the people waiting for him. Harold, with his quiet dignity, Maria, who struggled to keep her children safe, old Mr. Thompson, who had nowhere left to go. They depended on the supplies and the connection Keanu brought each week. What would happen if they were suddenly scattered, forced to hide from the very people meant to protect them? This growing police presence complicated everything. Keanu had always worked carefully to avoid interfering with law enforcement, but tonight that line seemed thinner than ever. The reality that his mission could be misunderstood or disrupted added a weight to the night that he hadn't felt before. Driving past a cluster of patrol cars, Keanu caught the serious expressions of officers as they scanned the streets. Their focus was sharp, their movements deliberate. It was clear they were looking for something or someone. The quiet streets felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage set for a confrontation he was desperate to avoid. As the SUV moved deeper into the neighborhood, Keanu's thoughts turned inward. He reflected on how difficult it was to navigate this delicate terrain, where compassion had to coexist with caution. He understood the challenges police officers faced, their duty to uphold the law and maintain public safety, yet he also knew that harsh enforcement alone rarely solved the underlying problems. The balance between helping people in need and respecting law enforcement boundaries was fragile and often misunderstood. Keanu had become a bridge, albeit a small one, trying to connect these worlds, but the increasing patrols were a stark reminder that this bridge was fragile, and the risk of falling was real. Keanu's SUV turned a corner and moved past a small park where he often found groups of people seeking shelter under the trees. Tonight, the park was eerily empty. No faint glow of campfires, no muffled voices or soft laughter, just the distant wail of a siren and the steady glow of police car lights in the distance. This absence spoke volumes. The people he usually helped had either been forced to move or were hiding. The reality hit hard. His mission was not just about delivering supplies. It was about providing a sense of safety and stability in a world that offered little of either. But tonight, that mission felt threatened. Keanu adjusted the rearview mirror, catching sight of a patrol car following at a discreet distance. He kept his speed steady, careful not to draw attention, but aware that every move was being watched. His pulse quickened. Was this normal police presence, or had his activities sparked suspicion? He thought about the weeks leading up to this moment. Increasing complaints from neighborhood associations, more calls about unauthorized encampments, and a growing push from local officials to clear public spaces. The tension between the homeless community and law enforcement had been rising, and Keanu had felt the impact firsthand. He had tried to adapt, shifting routes, timing visits to avoid patrols, even speaking quietly with some officers when the opportunity arose. But tonight's visible show of force was different. It was as if the city was sending a message, a warning to anyone operating in these spaces without official sanction. The thought filled Keanu with a deep sadness. He knew that many officers were simply doing their jobs, responding to orders, trying to maintain order in a complex and difficult environment. But the human cost of these crackdowns was often invisible. People were displaced, pushed further into the margins, and left to face harsher conditions alone. Keanu's mission was to remind those people that they were seen and valued. But as the patrol cars multiplied, he feared the growing divide between compassion and enforcement might be widening instead of bridging. He glanced at the packages in the back seat, their contents a lifeline in a harsh world. Blankets rated for cold nights, carefully selected food, personal hygiene kits, and notes written with hope and kindness. Each item represented hours of preparation, hours spent thinking about individuals he might never meet, but whose lives he hoped to touch. The stakes felt higher than ever. If the increased police presence meant fewer people willing to accept help, or if it risked exposing his mission to scrutiny, everything he had worked for could be undone. The balance between helping and hiding was becoming impossible. Keanu's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated the next stretch of road. He reminded himself that his purpose was clear: to serve quietly, without fanfare, without attracting unwanted attention. But the reality was that tonight's journey might be the most challenging yet. The city's streets were no longer just a backdrop for his mission. They were an active, unpredictable force. Each turn held uncertainty, each shadow a question. Keanu's resolve deepened. He would continue, no matter the obstacles, because for those counting on him, giving up was not an option. As Keanu drove past familiar landmarks, the old library, the corner diner long closed for the night, he felt the weight of the night pressing down. The increasing police presence was a constant reminder that his mission existed in a precarious space between hope and suspicion. He thought about the delicate dance he had to perform, offering aid without provoking interference, reaching out without crossing unseen lines. This balance was not just about legality. It was about trust. Trust between those who needed help, those who offered it, and those sworn to protect the city. The flashing lights in the distance seemed to grow brighter with each passing mile. Keanu's mind raced with possibilities. Was someone watching him, specifically? Was this more than just routine patrols? The anxiety was a new companion on these drives, an unwelcome but real presence. His eyes lingered on the packages in the back seat once more. Each one was a promise, to keep someone warm, fed, and reminded that they were not alone. These small acts of kindness were his way of resisting the harshness that threatened to swallow these lives whole. Tonight, the streets felt less forgiving and the path ahead more uncertain. But Keanu's determination did not waver. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, driven by a quiet conviction that compassion could still find a way through the shadows. The SUV rolled slowly through the quiet streets, the city's nighttime shadows stretching long and deep. Keanu's eyes stayed focused on the road ahead, but his mind drifted to the person waiting for him at his first stop, Harold, the veteran who had quietly captured Keanu's heart months ago. Harold's story was etched in every wrinkle on his face, every weary line in his tired eyes. Keanu thought back to their first meeting. Harold had been sleeping in his old car, parked beneath a flickering street lamp, bundled in a threadbare coat. They had talked for hours that night about the war he'd fought in, the battles he still faced with his health and loneliness, and the invisible wounds that no medication could heal. It was clear Harold needed more than just blankets or food. He needed someone to remember him, to remind him that he mattered. If Keanu were to remember him, the packages Keanu carried were vital. Among them were warm blankets designed for harsh nights, insulated sleeping bags that could fend off the cold, carefully selected food with high nutritional value, and small medical supplies Harold often requested. Keanu had come to understand the importance of these items, not as mere objects, but as lifelines. With each mile closer to Harold's usual spot, Keanu's thoughts deepened. He remembered the laughter they shared despite hardships, the gentle humor Harold used to mask pain, the stories of comrades lost and dreams faded. These memories made the mission more than a delivery. It was a human connection, fragile but real. Keanu glanced again at the rearview mirror, alert to every movement behind him. The night still held an uneasy silence, punctuated only by distant sirens and the soft hum of the city. The streets, once a refuge for those like Harold, now seemed to grow more uncertain with every passing moment. The recent police presence had weighed heavily on Keanu's mind. His hope was that tonight's delivery would go smoothly, that Harold would find some comfort in the packages, and that the fragile peace of the night wouldn't be broken by unwanted interruptions. As the car rounded the corner onto the street where Harold's car was usually parked, a sharp flash of light suddenly appeared in the rearview mirror. Blue and red emergency lights shimmered, casting an urgent glow through the darkness. A police cruiser signaled him to pull over. Keanu's heart jumped. The flashing lights filled the rearview mirror like an unwelcome storm breaking over a calm sea. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The gentle night, the quiet mission, the fragile hope carried in the back seat of his SUV. Now, it was all overshadowed by the bright, blinking lights demanding his attention. He eased his vehicle to the side of the road, hands steady on the wheel despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. His mind raced through scenarios, each more complex than the last. Would the officers understand? Would they see the care packages for what they were, or would suspicion cloud their judgment? The thought of his mission unraveling so close to its start tightened his chest. Keanu reminded himself to stay calm, to speak honestly, and to be respectful. He had seen how quickly misunderstanding could turn to conflict, and tonight he hoped for none of that. The mission was about helping people, not creating more problems. The officer approached the driver's side window, the sound of footsteps sharp and purposeful on the pavement. Keanu rolled down the window, meeting the officer's steady gaze. Recognition flickered for a moment, a brief acknowledgement of his fame, but the situation quickly returned to protocol. "Good evening, sir," the officer said, voice polite but firm. "I pulled you over for speeding. You were going about 15 miles over the limit, in a residential area. May I see your license and registration, please?" Keanu reached for his wallet, producing the documents smoothly. The officer took them, but his eyes shifted momentarily to the rear of the SUV. Something about the vehicle's contents caught his attention, drawing a cautious, curious glance. Keanu noticed the change immediately. The polite tone had deepened with a hint of suspicion, an invisible line drawn between routine enforcement and something more serious. He sensed the officer was weighing his next steps carefully. The pause felt long, each second stretched by the tension that filled the space between them. Keanu's thoughts returned to Harold and the other people waiting. Every moment of delay risked their safety, their trust, and the fragile network of care he had built over months. The officer's hand moved toward the radio, fingers poised. Keanu's breath caught. The simple traffic stop was no longer simple. Whatever came next could alter everything. The quiet hum of the radio filled the tense air as the officer reached for his radio and spoke into the microphone. Keanu's heart began to race with every word he could not hear but instinctively understood. Backup was on its way. The presence of additional officers meant this traffic stop was quickly escalating beyond routine. The simple delivery mission he had carefully planned was suddenly being thrust into an uncertain spotlight. Keanu's hands rested on the steering wheel, palms flat and visible, while his mind reeled through possible outcomes. Would the officers understand the true purpose behind the carefully wrapped packages filling the back seat and trunk? Or would they see only suspicion, as if this mission of compassion was something illicit or dangerous? The officer's gaze flickered back toward the SUV's rear, narrowing as he took in the sight of the cargo. The neatly stacked bundles of blankets, food supplies, and medical kits looked more like the inventory of an operation than a charitable mission. Keanu felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a mixture of anxiety and resolve. This was the moment where everything could change. The officer turned back to Keanu with a serious expression. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. We have to inspect the contents. Please cooperate." Keanu nodded, swallowing hard but keeping his voice calm. "Of course, officer. I understand." As he stepped out onto the quiet street, the cool night air felt sharper somehow, the shadows deeper. The sound of distant sirens and the faint rustle of leaves filled the silence between him and the approaching backup vehicles. Every step toward the patrol car felt heavier than the last. The peaceful mission of delivering hope was now caught in a web of suspicion. Keanu's thoughts drifted momentarily back to Harold, the veteran, waiting just a few blocks away. How many nights had Harold survived because of these supplies? How many others depended on this quiet kindness? The stakes were higher than ever, not just for Keanu, but for everyone counting on him. He glanced toward the rear of his SUV, where the packages rested, symbols of care and dignity. Each bundle contained not just necessities, but hope. The hope of warmth on a cold night, nourishment when hunger gnawed, and a reminder that someone still cared. The handwritten notes tucked inside each package were messages from the heart, personal words meant to reach the soul. Standing beside the patrol car, Keanu met the officer's eyes. There was no malice there, only duty tempered by uncertainty. The world outside the spotlight was a different place, one where good intentions could be questioned and kindness mistaken for something else entirely. As the backup cars pulled up, their flashing lights briefly illuminating the quiet street, Keanu took a deep breath. He was about to open the doors and reveal the truth of his mission, hoping the officers would see beyond the surface. This was more than a traffic stop. It was a moment that could redefine how compassion was understood in a world often quick to judge. He prepared himself to answer questions, to explain months of quiet work, and to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. The night was growing darker, but so was Keanu's determination to protect the fragile light he carried. The officers gathered around the vehicle, their expressions serious, radios murmuring as they coordinated their approach. Keanu knew that in this moment, the truth had to be clearer than ever, that the packages were not evidence of wrongdoing, but symbols of humanity reaching out in the dark. With steady hands, he reached for the door handle, ready to show them what lay inside, ready to transform suspicion into understanding and, perhaps, to forge a new path toward hope. Officer Ramirez stepped toward the driver's side window with a calm but cautious demeanor. The quiet of the night seemed to deepen as he approached Keanu Reeves's SUV. He had recognized the actor immediately, but his training and sense of duty told him to maintain protocol. This was not a moment for celebrity recognition. It was a moment for procedure. "Good evening, sir," Officer Ramirez said with measured professionalism. His tone was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge of formality. "I pulled you over for speeding. You were going about 15 miles over the posted limit in this residential area." Keanu nodded slowly, his heart pounding, not from the speeding violation itself, but from the weight of what lay hidden in his vehicle. The carefully packed packages, the blankets, the food, the medical supplies, they were more than cargo. They were lifelines. Every minute of delay, every moment of suspicion threatened to unravel a delicate mission months in the making. "May I see your license and registration, please?" Officer Ramirez continued. His eyes briefly flicked to the back seat through the tinted window. He caught sight of the stacks of boxes and bags, neatly arranged but clearly substantial in volume. The sight piqued his curiosity, sparking a cautious suspicion. What exactly was in that car? Keanu reached into his wallet with steady hands, pulling out the requested documents. His mind raced, trying to anticipate the next steps. He knew the rules of engagement with law enforcement, but he also knew that this was not an ordinary stop. The night had already shifted, and his mission felt fragile and exposed. Officer Ramirez took the license and registration, glancing over the information carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I appreciate your cooperation." His voice remained professional, but the watchful way he studied the vehicle suggested he was preparing for a closer look. Keanu offered a polite nod, trying to maintain calm. "Is there anything else I should know, officer?" he asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety beneath. "No, sir," Officer Ramirez replied. "Just routine procedure for now." But his eyes betrayed a quiet doubt, lingering on the rear of the SUV, as if weighing the unseen cargo against his experience. The street was still except for the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of leaves. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken questions. Keanu's chest tightened. The carefully constructed world of his weekly mission now felt vulnerable to being misunderstood. Officer Ramirez shifted slightly, taking a breath before continuing. "I need to make sure everything here is in order. Given the amount of material I see, I might have to ask you some questions." Keanu nodded again. "I understand, officer. I'm happy to explain." The officer's cautious approach was a reminder that this was no longer a simple speeding stop. It was the beginning of an investigation that could alter the course of the night, and perhaps much more. The cool night air filled the space between them as Officer Ramirez held the license and registration, weighing his next move carefully. He had seen a lot in his years on the force, but this was different. The volume of cargo, the organized nature of it, and the high-profile driver made this stop unusual. "Mr. Reeves," the officer began, keeping his voice neutral but firm, "what exactly are you transporting tonight? There's a significant amount of material in your vehicle." Keanu met his gaze steadily. "I deliver supplies to homeless individuals throughout the city," he explained quietly. "Blankets, food, medical supplies. I've been doing it for several months now, trying to help people who don't have access to basic necessities." Officer Ramirez's eyebrows knit together slightly, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism crossing his face. "You're aware that transporting large quantities like this can raise concerns, especially late at night and in residential areas?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes, officer. That's why I'm careful and try to avoid drawing attention. It's important these people receive these items, especially during colder nights." The officer's eyes drifted again to the back seat, then the trunk visible through the tinted windows. "Do you have documentation for these supplies? Receipts, permits, anything that explains the source?" Keanu shook his head. "No formal paperwork. This is personal effort, funded privately and organized through a small charity I help run. It's mostly word of mouth and direct donations. I handle the distribution myself to ensure it reaches those who need it." Officer Ramirez considered this carefully. "I understand the intention. But we have to ensure there's no illegal activity, no unregulated distribution of goods that might violate local ordinances. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, frustration rising but tempered by respect. I appreciate your concerns, officer. Everything here is legal and meant solely to help people. I want to be transparent. The officer's stance shifted subtly, a sign that he was assessing whether to escalate or conclude. I'll need to inspect the contents of your vehicle to verify. Keanu took a breath, steadying himself. I understand. Please, feel free. Officer Ramirez gestured toward the back seat. Please open the doors so I can take a closer look. Keanu complied, unlocking the doors and carefully pushing them open. The officer's flashlight beam swept over the neatly packed boxes, blankets, and bags. He began to read the labels. Medical kits, insulated sleeping bags, canned food. As the officer examined the cargo, his tone softened slightly but remained cautious. These look like quality supplies, well organized. Are these meant for specific individuals? Keanu nodded. Yes, I know many of them by name. I deliver directly, making sure their specific needs are met. The officer paused, the weight of this admission hanging between them. It's unusual to see such a personal approach. Keanu smiled faintly. It's about respect and connection. I believe that when people are seen as individuals, help can be more meaningful. There was a brief silence, broken only by distant sirens and the rustle of wind. Officer Ramirez's expression was unreadable, caught between duty and understanding. Mr. Reeves, he said finally, I'm going to need backup to assist with this inspection. It's standard procedure when we encounter this volume of cargo. Keanu's pulse quickened again. The night was shifting fast, and his mission's fragile secrecy was hanging by a thread. Keanu carefully closed the SUV doors behind him, the quiet click sounding louder than usual in the stillness of the night. The cool air wrapped around him, carrying the faint scent of the city, the distant aroma of late-night diners closing up, the hum of streetlights, and the occasional murmur of passing cars. Yet beneath these ordinary sounds was a growing tension that settled deep in his chest. He glanced once more toward the rear of the vehicle, where the carefully packed supplies rested quietly. Each package was more than just an item. It was a symbol of hope and dignity for people who had long been forgotten by the world around them. The thought of those individuals waiting for this delivery filled Keanu with a renewed sense of responsibility and urgency. Officer Ramirez stood nearby, his posture professional but alert. His eyes flickered to Keanu with a mixture of respect and scrutiny, embodying the dual nature of the night. Respect for the man's intentions, but vigilance toward the unknown cargo. The soft crackle of the officer's radio broke the silence. Dispatch requesting backup for a vehicle inspection. Ramirez spoke clearly. High property driver, substantial cargo. Need additional units for assistance and safety. Keanu's heart quickened. The request for backup meant the situation was escalating. What had begun as a routine traffic stop was evolving into a more serious inquiry. The fragile secrecy of his mission was at risk, and with it, the trust he had worked so hard to build with those who depended on him. He took a slow, steadying breath, pushing aside the rising anxiety. Whatever happened next, he knew he had to be honest, transparent, and patient. The officers had a job to do, and Keanu was ready to let them see the truth behind the packages and the mission. Minutes later, the distant glow of headlights appeared on the street, growing brighter as two additional patrol cars pulled up with flashing lights. The street seemed to hold its breath, the night suddenly filled with a presence that was impossible to ignore. Two officers stepped out, their movements precise and cautious. They exchanged brief words with Officer Ramirez before focusing their attention on Keanu and the SUV. The weight of their scrutiny was palpable. Keanu met their eyes, his expression calm but resolute. He could feel the unspoken questions lingering in the air. Questions about legality, purpose, and the mysterious cargo hidden inside the vehicle. He thought again of Harold and the others waiting for these supplies. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about him. It was about the people whose lives depended on this quiet mission. The officers approached the vehicle, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they prepared to inspect the contents. Keanu stood by, ready to answer their questions and to reveal the heart behind the cargo. As the inspection began, the night seemed to stretch endlessly. Every moment was filled with tension, hope, and the possibility of misunderstanding. Yet beneath it all was a quiet determination to protect the fragile light of compassion shining quietly through the city's shadows. Keanu felt the weight of the night on his shoulders, but remained steadfast. No matter what unfolded, he was committed to standing for those who could not stand for themselves. The truth was his shield, and hope was his guide. Keanu reached slowly into the glove compartment, retrieving his driver's license and registration with steady hands. His mind, however, was racing. The usual calm that accompanied these weekly missions was starting to crack under the weight of the officer's growing attention. Officer Ramirez's gaze drifted repeatedly toward the back seat and trunk of the SUV. The sight of large bags and neatly stacked boxes had shifted the atmosphere from routine traffic stop to something more serious. The tension was tangible. Keanu could feel it in the way the officer's body stiffened, how his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if piecing together a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Each glance toward the cargo was loaded with suspicion, questioning what exactly was hidden behind those tinted windows. "Mr. Reeves," Officer Ramirez said carefully, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. We have to take a closer look at what you're transporting." His tone was polite but firm, a clear signal that this was no longer a casual stop. Keanu's heart sank. He understood immediately. This was the point where his private mission risked exposure and misunderstanding. The carefully prepared supplies, the blankets, the food, the medical kits, might be seen not as acts of kindness, but as suspicious or even illegal cargo. He nodded slowly, complying without hesitation. "I understand, officer." As he opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, the cool night air brushed against his face, sharp and clear. The distant sounds of the city continued, but around them, a new stillness had taken hold. A stillness filled with watchful eyes and unspoken questions. Officer Ramirez gestured toward the rear of the SUV. "Please remain calm and cooperative as we inspect the vehicle." Keanu raised his hand slightly, signaling he meant no resistance. His mind flickered briefly to Harold and the others waiting for help. This inspection threatened to disrupt their fragile safety and the trust they placed in him. The officer reached for the back door handle and slowly opened it, shining his flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the carefully packed supplies. Boxes labeled with names, bundles tied with string, plastic bags filled with essentials. The officer's expression remained unreadable, but the intensity of his inspection was clear. Keanu stood nearby, watching, feeling the heavy weight of suspicion settle over the scene. The night had shifted from a quiet mission of compassion to an investigation, and he was the center of it. Keanu said, "The kid, his dog, sucked. His phone." Officer Ramirez began methodically opening packages, scanning the contents with increasing scrutiny. As the flashlight moved from one item to another, a list of supplies was called out. Insulated blankets, first aid kits, canned food, bottled water, hygiene products. Each item seemed mundane in isolation, but their collective presence told a different story. The officer's tone was cautious but curious. "These are quality supplies, well organized." Keanu nodded quietly. "They're meant for people living outdoors, people who don't have a safe place to sleep." Ramirez's eyes lingered on a box marked with a name, Harold, and a handwritten note tucked inside. He carefully unfolded the paper and read aloud, "Harold, stay warm. You matter." The sincerity of the message caught the officer off guard. For a brief moment, the suspicion in his eyes softened into something more thoughtful. Still, the professional caution remained. "Mr. Reeves, you understand why we have to be thorough. Transporting this volume of material raises questions. It's unusual, especially late at night in this neighborhood." Keanu met his gaze steadily. "I do understand, officer. But everything here is legal and meant only to help." The officer's gaze shifted to the trunk, now opened and equally packed. He continued cataloging the items: portable heaters, nutritional supplements, durable sleeping bags rated for cold weather. The care and detail that had gone into the preparation were evident. As the search went on, Keanu's anxiety mingled with a quiet resolve. He was exposing his mission to scrutiny, but he believed in the honesty of his work. Each package represented lives he hoped to protect, even if only for a few hours each night. The officer's flashlight illuminated a small cooler with prescription medications. Ramirez's voice grew cautious again. "These require special handling. Do you have prescriptions for these?" Keanu explained calmly. "Yes, officer. I work with healthcare providers who donate unused or surplus medications legally. I make sure these go only to people who need them." The officer nodded slowly, absorbing the explanation. "This is not typical charity work. It's more organized than most operations we encounter." Keanu's voice carried quiet determination. "It has to be. People's lives depend on it." The air grew heavier with each passing moment as Officer Ramirez's radio crackled softly, his voice calm but precise. He relayed to dispatch the details of what they'd found: an inventory of supplies, the quantity of boxes, the presence of prescription medications, and the personal notes carefully tucked inside. The official tone in his voice contrasted sharply with the personal nature of the mission unfolding before them. Keanu stood nearby, hands relaxed but heart pounding. The arrival of backup was inevitable. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars rolled quietly onto the street, their flashing lights piercing the night and casting vivid colors against the walls of nearby houses. The quiet neighborhood, once a sanctuary for those Keanu sought to help, now felt transformed into a stage for scrutiny. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions cautious but curious. They exchanged brief words with Officer Ramirez before focusing their attention fully on the cargo-filled SUV and its high-profitable driver. Their trained eyes scanned the packages, the labels, the neat arrangement, as if searching for any sign of wrongdoing. Keanu met their gaze with steady resolve. Though the situation was tense, he refused to waver. This was more than a traffic stop now. It was a defining moment. A chance to show that behind the suspicion was a man committed to making a difference, in a world too often indifferent. He thought once more of Harold, Maria, and the others waiting for these supplies. Their lives hung in the balance of this moment. The fragile trust that had taken months to build now rested on the understanding that would come in the next few minutes. The officers began to open boxes and bags, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they examined every item: sleeping bags rated for cold weather, insulated blankets, cans of nutritious food, personal hygiene kits, and carefully packed medical supplies emerged one by one. The meticulous care in the packing was unmistakable, each package labeled with a name and a heartfelt note. One officer held up a note, reading aloud softly: "Harold, stay warm. We're thinking of you." The sincerity in the words caused a pause. The suspicion that had hung so heavily in the air began to lift slightly, replaced by a growing awareness of the compassion behind the cargo. Still, professionalism demanded thoroughness. Questions arose about the source of the medications, the legality of transporting such items, and the scale of the operation. Keanu answered patiently, explaining the legal channels and the personal effort involved. He spoke quietly of partnerships with healthcare providers who donated surplus medications and the importance of delivering them directly to those in need. The officers listened, some nodding in understanding, others still cautious but less rigid. The night that began with suspicion was shifting slowly toward recognition. Recognition that this was no ordinary cargo, no ordinary mission, but a quiet lifeline for those abandoned by society. As the search continued, the tension in the air remained, but so did a growing respect. The officers, trained to detect wrongdoing, were now witnessing something rare, a glimpse into the depth of human kindness hidden in plain sight. Keanu felt the weight of the night's uncertainty but stood firm. Whatever the outcome, he was determined to protect the fragile hope that the supplies represented. The truth was clear to him, and he hoped it would soon be clear to those now questioning it. The night stretched on, a balance of scrutiny and understanding, suspicion and empathy. This traffic stop was no longer just about speed or cargo. It was a moment where the true meaning of service, sacrifice, and compassion could be revealed, and perhaps where the walls between worlds could begin to come down. Officer Ramirez reached for his radio, the microphone feeling heavy in his hand. The weight of the situation had shifted dramatically since the moment he first pulled Keanu Reeves over. The discovery of the large quantity of carefully packed supplies in the SUV's back seat and trunk was not something he could handle alone. His voice was steady as he spoke to dispatch. Unit 24 requesting backup for a vehicle inspection. High prevalence driver. Cargo looks suspicious. Need assistance for thorough search and safety precautions. The radio crackled in response, confirming that backup was en route. Ramirez's heart quickened, knowing that the arrival of more officers would turn this quiet street into a scene that would attract attention. His professional training reminded him that procedures must be followed, but he also felt the weight of the growing tension around him. Keanu stood quietly by the driver's side, hands visible, watching the officer's every move. The calm determination in his eyes was mingled with an understandable apprehension. He knew that more police presence meant more scrutiny, more questions, and a higher risk that his mission could be misunderstood or disrupted. The quiet night air was filled with the distant hum of the city, but it felt like the world had narrowed to this one moment on a residential street. The soft sounds of footsteps on pavement broke the silence as two additional patrol cars approached, their flashing lights piercing the darkness. Neighbors in their homes noticed the sudden burst of activity, curtains twitching as they glimpsed the flashing reds and blues. The peaceful night had been shattered by an unexpected spectacle. Whispers of concern and curiosity began to circulate, a neighborhood awash in speculation about the nature of the police stop. Officer Ramirez greeted the arriving officers with a quick briefing. Subject is Keanu Reeves, driver of a vehicle packed with a large amount of cargo. Cargo appears to be supplies, blankets, food, medical kits, but volume and organization raise suspicion. We need to conduct a thorough inspection. The two backup officers nodded, their expressions serious and focused. They moved to position themselves strategically around the SUV, eyes scanning the surroundings while preparing to assist with the inspection. Keanu felt the growing weight of the scene around him. What had begun as a simple speeding violation was now a serious investigation unfolding on a quiet street. The stakes were higher than ever, and the tension was palpable. The arrival of the backup officers transformed the atmosphere. What had been a routine stop now carried the weight of an unfolding inquiry. The flashing lights reflected off nearby windows and walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. Officer Ramirez coordinated with his colleagues, assigning roles and preparing to open the SUV's doors for a detailed search. The officers exchanged brief but purposeful words, their tone guarded but professional. They understood the sensitivity of the situation, not only because of the driver's celebrity status, but also because of the unusual nature of the cargo. Keanu remained composed, though inside a storm of thoughts churned. He thought about the months of preparation that had led to this night, the careful selection of supplies, the personal notes written to each recipient, the quiet hours spent learning about the people he aimed to help. He was aware that every move now was being watched and judged, not just by the officers, but by neighbors and potentially the wider world. The risk of media attention or public exposure loomed. His private mission, hidden from the spotlight for so long, threatened to become headline news in an instant. The officers began opening the back doors, revealing the carefully packed bundles inside. The flashlight beams illuminated the blankets, food containers, medical kits, and handwritten notes. The level of organization suggested a planned and thoughtful effort, not a random collection. One officer spoke quietly into his radio, describing the contents as they cataloged each item. The clinical tone contrasted with the human stories behind the supplies, stories that only Keanu fully understood. Neighbors gathered quietly at windows and doorways, their curiosity piqued. Some whispered concerns about what the police might be searching for. Others speculated about the presence of the famous actor in such an unusual context. The street had become a stage for an unfolding drama. Keanu stood calmly, but his mind raced. He understood the officers' caution, but hoped they could see beyond the suspicion to the real purpose behind the cargo. This was about saving lives, offering dignity, and reminding forgotten people they were not alone. The officers' thoroughness continued, their examination meticulous. Every package was opened, every label read aloud. The sheer volume of supplies amazed some, raised questions for others. Keanu answered questions patiently, explaining the legal and humanitarian nature of his work. The dialogue between him and the officers was careful, respectful, and honest. Yet beneath the professionalism was an undercurrent of tension, the fear that this mission, so vital to those in need, could be derailed by misunderstanding. As the inspection progressed, the night air grew heavier, charged with anticipation and unspoken questions. Officer Ramirez and his colleagues methodically examined every box and bundle, their flashlights illuminating the care and thought Keanu had poured into his mission. It was no random collection of items. They were lifelines, meticulously prepared for individuals struggling against hardship and neglect. The officers began to piece together the story behind the cargo. The presence of carefully labeled packages with handwritten notes added a deeply personal element. Each note contained words of encouragement, messages meant to restore dignity and hope. The officers exchanged glances, some filled with skepticism, others beginning to soften, realizing this was more than just supplies. It was a quiet human connection forged in the shadows. Keanu watched closely, his heart steady but heavy. This was a moment of vulnerability, his private work exposed to scrutiny. Yet he felt a quiet strength, knowing the truth was visible to those willing to see it. The packages represented more than warmth or food. They represented respect for people whose society too often overlooked. The neighborhood around them had grown restless. Inside homes, whispers traveled as neighbors speculated about the flashing lights and police presence. The quiet street had become an unlikely stage for a drama few expected. Some wondered why a famous actor was involved. Others feared what might be discovered. The tension was palpable. Back at the SUV, officers carefully handled prescription medications, scrutinizing their packaging and legality. Questions were asked and answered patiently by Keanu, who explained the legal channels through which these medicines were obtained and the importance of delivering them directly to people in need. The sincerity in his voice began to chip away at doubts. The investigation, initially a source of tension and suspicion, was slowly transforming into a discovery of something rare and genuine. The officers' professional reserve gave way to moments of quiet admiration. They recognized the scale of effort and compassion behind the cargo, understanding that this was a mission of humanity, not criminality. Keanu felt the weight of the night, the fragile balance between scrutiny and understanding, fear and empathy. The flashing lights that had once seemed ominous now illuminated a profound act of kindness. This was no longer just a traffic stop. It was a testament to what quiet dedication could achieve in a world quick to judge. As the last packages were inspected, the officers exchanged more thoughtful looks. The scene had shifted. What began with suspicion was becoming an acknowledgement of service, of a man willing to step into the shadows and fight for those forgotten. Keanu took a deep breath, preparing for the conversations ahead. The night was far from over, but in that moment, a new understanding had begun to take root. The fragile hope carried in the back of his SUV was no longer hidden. It was seen, questioned, and slowly, quietly respected. The officers closed in on the SUV, flashlights cutting through the night as their beams landed on the tightly packed cargo. The quiet rustling of wrapping paper filled the space as they carefully opened boxes and unfolded bundles. The scene that had begun with a simple traffic stop was transforming into a detailed inspection, each item examined with a practiced eye. "Sleeping bags," one officer announced, lifting a heavy, insulated bag from the back seat. "Thermal blankets, rated for sub-zero temperatures. Non-perishable canned food," another added, carefully pulling out stacks of canned beans, vegetables, and soups. "Looks like a solid nutritional variety." The officers called out each item aloud, their voices calm but edged with the tension of uncertainty. They cataloged hygiene kits, toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, feminine products, and bottles of clean water. Medical supplies followed: bandages, antiseptics, first aid kits, all neatly packed in boxes and labeled meticulously. The organized nature of the cargo stood out. The supplies were not haphazardly thrown together. They were clearly planned, wrapped, and labeled with care. Each package bore the name of a recipient and included small handwritten notes filled with messages of hope and encouragement. Officer Stevens was the first to voice his growing concerns. "This isn't just charity, is it? The scale and organization suggest an unauthorized distribution operation. We need to know if this is registered, permitted, or regulated." Keanu took a deep breath, his hands clenched lightly at his sides. "I assure you, it's legal. It's a personal mission. I deliver these supplies directly to people in need, homeless individuals, veterans, families struggling on the streets." Stevens narrowed his eyes. "No paperwork? No permits? That's a serious issue, especially with the medications I see here." Keanu's voice remained steady but carried an undercurrent of frustration. "This isn't a commercial operation. It's funded through donations and personal contributions. I oversee the distribution myself to make sure it reaches those who truly need it." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. The level of organization that had once been a source of pride for Keanu was now fueling suspicion. Each label, each note, now seemed like evidence of a more formal, possibly unauthorized operation. The quiet street grew heavier with tension. Keanu's anxiety rose, but he refused to back down. He believed in his mission and hoped his honesty would eventually break through the wall of doubt. Officer Stevens carefully lifted a small container from one of the boxes, his flashlight reflecting off the amber glass of a prescription medication bottle. He turned toward Keanu with a serious expression. "Antibiotics, painkillers. Do you have the prescriptions or legal documentation for these?" Keanu nodded slowly, his voice calm but earnest. "Yes, officer. These medications were donated legally by healthcare providers and clinics. I work with them directly to ensure these medicines reach people who need them most, those with prescriptions or ongoing medical needs." Stephen's brow furrowed, weighing the information carefully. Transporting prescription medications without proper oversight or documentation can have serious legal implications. You're aware of that, correct? "I am," Keanu replied. "And I'm very careful to follow the law. That's why I coordinate closely with healthcare partners and make sure everything is handled properly. My goal is to help, not to cause trouble." "Enrico, the officers continued their thorough cataloging of the supplies, noting the large quantities of high-quality sleeping bags, insulated blankets, canned food, hygiene kits, and first aid supplies. The sheer volume was striking, and the level of organization was clearly beyond casual charity. Another officer commented quietly, "This looks like a well-organized operation." But the scale raises red flags. Are you part of a larger group? Who funds all this, and how is it tracked? Keanu answered patiently, "It's primarily a small circle of volunteers and donors. We try to keep things as simple as possible, so help gets to people quickly and without bureaucratic delays. There isn't a big formal structure, just people who care." The officers exchanged serious glances, their tone professional but edged with lingering skepticism. The night dragged on as they documented every detail. The contents of each box, serial numbers on medication bottles, labels on food cans, the personal notes tucked inside. Keanu's anxiety grew alongside his hope. He prayed that the officers would see beyond the paperwork and suspicion to the heart of the mission, saving lives and restoring dignity. Each package represented a person, a story, a struggle, a hope for better days. The officers whispered among themselves in low tones, debating whether this distribution was lawful or if further investigation was needed. Their skepticism was palpable, but so was their gradual curiosity. Keanu stood quietly, preparing himself for whatever might come next. The mission he'd poured his heart into was at risk of being dismantled by misunderstanding. Still, his resolve did not waver. He believed in the truth of his work and the power of compassion to break through even the toughest doubts. The air was thick with tension as Officer Stevens returned his attention to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, I need to be clear. Are you absolutely certain that every item here was obtained legally and is being distributed in full compliance with local laws? The scope of this effort is large and unusual. Without proper registration or oversight, this could lead to serious legal issues." Keanu met his gaze with steady confidence, his voice unwavering. "I'm absolutely certain. Every package, every box, is meant to help people who have no one else. I deliver these supplies personally to ensure they reach those who truly need them." There was a pause, the weight of Keanu's words settling in the space between them. "It's rare to see such a personal and large-scale effort," the officer said. "We have a duty to ensure it complies with regulations. That's why we need to conduct a thorough inspection." Keanu nodded, the frustration and anxiety that had surfaced earlier giving way to quiet determination. "I understand completely. I want to cooperate fully." The officers continued opening boxes, flashlights illuminating thermal blankets, nutritious meals, medical supplies, and personal hygiene products. The careful attention to quality and detail was clear in every item. The officers began to read aloud the handwritten notes affixed to many of the packages. One officer's voice softened as he read a simple message: "You matter. Stay warm and safe." For a brief moment, the suspicion that had hung over the scene gave way to something more human and real. Behind the scenes, neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering among themselves as the flashing lights painted the street with shifting colors. The tension and uncertainty outside contrasted with the slowly growing understanding within the circle of officers. The inspection had evolved from suspicion to discovery, a glimpse into a rare act of kindness in a world quick to judge and slow to believe. The officers gathered to discuss quietly, their expressions a mix of professionalism and reluctant admiration. Keanu remained patient, his heart pounding with the hope that the truth of his mission would be seen and accepted. This was no longer a simple traffic stop. It had become a test of character, trust, and intent. The fragile line between suspicion and understanding stretched taut. Keanu prayed that this night, which had begun in doubt, would end in recognition, that compassion could shine through the darkest of shadows, and that his quiet mission would survive scrutiny. As the officers continued their search through the SUV, something unexpected caught Officer Ramirez's attention. Tucked beneath layers of blankets and carefully packed boxes, he found small envelopes and folded pieces of paper attached to many of the packages. He pulled one free, unfolding it with cautious curiosity. The note was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged from time but still legible. Ramirez read aloud, "Harold, stay strong. We're thinking of you. Keep warm." The simple message resonated through the quiet street. It was a moment of stillness in the midst of tension. The officers exchanged looks, their skepticism giving way, if only briefly, to surprise and something close to empathy. Keanu stepped forward, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years of quiet commitment. "Those notes are personal messages. I write them for each person I deliver supplies to. It's important they know they're not just receiving goods. They're receiving care and recognition." Officer Ramirez nodded slowly. "You personally know these people?" "Yes," Keanu replied. "I visit them regularly. I know many by name. We talk. I listen. It's more than just dropping off packages, it's about connection." The officers gathered around, examining more of the notes. Each one was addressed to a specific individual: Harold, Maria, Tomas, and contained words of encouragement, reminders of worth, and small messages of hope. Ramirez read another note softly. "Maria, stay safe. You're stronger than you think." The personal nature of these notes shifted the atmosphere. What had been a cold, clinical inspection began to feel more human. The officers seemed to grapple with the realization that this was not an impersonal operation, but a deeply personal act of kindness. Keanu continued, "These people have faced unimaginable challenges. Many have nowhere else to turn. The notes remind them they're seen, that they matter." The weight of his words settled over the group. The handwritten notes transformed the scene from suspicion to something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of compassion in a harsh world. Officer Stevens carefully unfolded another note, his flashlight illuminating the worn paper as he read aloud with a softness that hadn't been there before. "Thomas, keep fighting. We believe in you. Stay strong." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful, carrying a sincerity that cut through the tension surrounding the scene. He looked up at Keanu with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. It's rare to see this kind of personal involvement. Most charitable efforts are anonymous, or at least handled by organizations. This is something different. Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the quiet resolve that had driven him through countless nights of this work. Most donations are distant gestures, checks written from offices or websites, but that's not enough. People need to feel seen, heard, valued. Writing a note, knowing their name, it's about restoring dignity, one small step at a time. As the officers continued sifting through the packages, more notes came to light, each one personalized with care. The names, Harold, Maria, Thomas, James, were not just labels, but connections. Each note held messages of hope, encouragement, and acknowledgement of the struggles each person faced. A younger officer, clearly moved, asked quietly, "Do you really know all these people?" Keanu's faint smile was tinged with both pride and sadness. "I try. Over time, you learn their stories, the battles they've fought, the pain they carry. It becomes a responsibility. I visit regularly, check in, listen. These relationships mean everything." Officer Ramirez, standing nearby, interjected thoughtfully, "It's unusual for someone to go this far beyond just donating supplies. Most people don't want to get involved personally. They write a check and move on." Keanu's voice was steady, underscored with conviction. It's easy to forget that behind every statistic is a human being. When you hand someone a blanket and tell them, "You matter," it changes things. It's a reminder that they're not invisible. The officers examined note after note, many including specific requests, extra socks, medical ointments, warm gloves. The detail and care evident in these messages painted a picture of genuine empathy and dedication. Officer Stevens shook his head slowly, clearly affected. "This changes how I see this entire operation. It's not just charity, it's personal, it's real. Keanu felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since the stop began, it seemed the officers were beginning to understand. The suspicion was slowly giving way to recognition of a deeper mission. A quiet act of compassion in a world too often indifferent. As the last notes were carefully read aloud, Officer Ramirez cleared his throat, his tone now noticeably more reflective and measured. "Mr. Reeves, I have to be honest. The handwritten notes, the personal messages, and your involvement changed the whole nature of what we're seeing here. This isn't the kind of operation we initially thought it was." Keanu nodded, relief washing over him but tempered by the weight of the moment. "I'm glad to hear that. It's been a long road building trust with people who have been overlooked and forgotten for so long. These notes aren't just words. They're lifelines." The officers stepped back, gathering in a quiet cluster to discuss their findings in low voices. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What began with suspicion was evolving into understanding and a fragile respect. The handwritten notes had pierced the veil of doubt, revealing a mission rooted in humanity. Keanu looked toward the quiet street outside, thinking of Harold, Maria, Thomas, and the many others waiting silently in the cold. Their names had transformed from mere words on paper to symbols of resilience, stories of survival and hope. The street, once tense with flashing lights and whispered questions, now held a softer energy. The officers, who had begun as skeptical investigators, were now witnesses to a rare glimpse of selfless kindness. Officer Ramirez stepped forward and spoke, his voice calm but sincere. "This is a turning point. What you're doing is extraordinary. These notes, they're more than just messages. They're a bridge, a reminder of what real compassion looks like." Keanu felt the weight of those words deeply. The night's tension was beginning to melt, replaced by a shared recognition that this quiet mission was something truly special. For Keanu, the traffic stop had become much more than an interruption. It was a moment of revelation, a chance to show that behind every box, every note, was a person striving to make a difference, no matter the odds. The officers returned their attention to the vehicle, the inspection now tinged with respect. The tension lingered but was no longer oppressive. There was hope that this encounter might lead to understanding, even partnership. Keanu took a slow, steady breath, ready to continue explaining, to bridge the gap between suspicion and trust. The night was far from over, but the fragile light of compassion was shining brighter than before. The quiet tension in the street deepened as the distant rumble of an engine approached. Soon, a larger police vehicle pulled up, its presence commanding attention. Sergeant Walker stepped out, his posture confident and authoritative. The night air seemed to still, the flashing lights casting long shadows that danced against nearby walls. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, briefing the sergeant quickly but thoroughly. "Sir, we have a vehicle, stopped for speeding, driven by Keanu Reeves. The cargo is substantial: blankets, food, medical supplies, and handwritten notes addressed to individuals. Initial inspection raised suspicion of unauthorized distribution." Sergeant Walker nodded, his eyes sharp and analytical as he surveyed the scene. He moved toward Keanu with a firm but measured gait. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending his hand briefly in greeting. "I'm Sergeant Walker. I've been asked to review the situation." Keanu shook the sergeant's hand, his voice steady. "Thank you, Sergeant." Walker's expression was serious as he gestured toward the vehicle. "I understand you were driving over the speed limit, which prompted the stop, but the nature and volume of your cargo require further explanation. Can you tell me where these supplies came from?" Keanu met the sergeant's gaze calmly. "These supplies are part of a private humanitarian effort I've been involved with for several months. I gather donations and personally distribute them to homeless individuals and vulnerable people in the community." Walker raised an eyebrow. "Several months, you say? And you've been operating without formal permits or registration?" Keanu nodded. It's a small, informal operation, yes. We work closely with healthcare providers, local charities, and volunteers to ensure everything is legal and reaches those in need directly. I visit these individuals personally to build trust and meet their needs. The sergeant's gaze hardened slightly. You realize that unregulated distribution, especially of medications, can have serious legal consequences? I understand, Sergeant, Keanu replied. That's why I'm transparent and careful. I want to help, not break laws. Walker took a step back, folding his arms as he considered the situation. The night was thick with uncertainty. The evidence was clear, but the intent remained to be fully understood. Sergeant Walker moved closer to the SUV, crouching briefly to examine the carefully packed supplies. Flashlights revealed sleeping bags rated for cold weather, boxes of canned food, first aid kits, and prescription medications neatly organized. The handwritten notes were visible, their personal messages catching his eye. Walker read aloud from one note. "Harold, stay strong. We're thinking of you." The words lingered in the air, softening the officer's stern demeanor for a moment. He looked back at Keanu. These notes suggest a deep personal connection with the recipients. You personally know these individuals? Yes, Sergeant, Keanu said quietly. I've spent months building relationships. It's important to me that they know someone cares, that they're not invisible. Walker nodded slowly. It's a rare approach. Most large-scale charitable distributions are handled through formal channels and organizations. Keanu explained further. Traditional charity often feels impersonal, bureaucratic. I believe personal involvement can make a real difference. It's about dignity and trust, not just supplies. The sergeant studied him thoughtfully. And you take full responsibility for the legality of these items? The medications, especially? I do, Keanu replied firmly. All medications are donated legally, with appropriate oversight from healthcare providers. I ensure they go to people with prescriptions or medical needs. Walker's expression softened slightly, but his professionalism remained. You understand the concerns we have, given the volume and nature of these supplies? Keanu nodded. Absolutely. I welcome your scrutiny. I want this to be transparent and above board. The sergeant stood, pacing slowly as he reviewed the contents once more. The weight of responsibility on his shoulders was evident. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It had become a complex intersection of law, compassion, and human need. Sergeant Walker turned back to Keanu with a measured and thoughtful expression. Mr. Reeves, your sincerity and dedication are evident. However, the law requires certain protocols and oversight to ensure that operations like these are safe and lawful. Have you considered formalizing your humanitarian efforts through registered channels or official organizations? Keanu met the sergeant's gaze steadily, a quiet conviction in his eyes. I have thought about it, Sergeant, but at this stage, the informal nature of the operation allows me to maintain a direct, personal connection with those I help. I visit each individual regularly, learn their stories, and tailor the support to their specific needs. I worry that formalizing it too soon could add bureaucracy and slow down the help that so many desperately need. Walker nodded thoughtfully. There is value in that kind of personal involvement, yet there are risks too. Regulations and oversight exist to protect everyone involved, those who give, those who receive, and even you as the distributor. Keanu understood all too well. I do everything I can to mitigate those risks. I work closely with healthcare professionals, legal advisors, and community leaders. I want to make sure every step is transparent and above board. The sergeant took a slow breath, absorbing the weight of the situation. This is not a simple traffic stop anymore. It has become a complex case that sits at the intersection of law enforcement, public safety, and humanitarian aid. Your commitment is commendable, but it also places you in a delicate position. Keanu nodded quietly, feeling the gravity of those words. The night had stretched far beyond what he had anticipated. What started as a routine drive had evolved into a thorough investigation. a scrutiny of his private mission to offer dignity and hope. And then, a second death to... Walker's demeanor softened further as he continued. I will be reviewing all the information gathered tonight and discussing the situation with my superiors. For now, I appreciate your full cooperation. That will be noted and considered. A flicker of relief passed through Keanu's chest, but he knew the journey ahead was uncertain. The wheels of bureaucracy and law would turn slowly, and there were no guarantees of outcome. But in that moment, an opening had been created, a chance for dialogue, understanding, and perhaps partnership between authority and compassion. The sergeant's willingness to listen and consider was a glimmer of hope. Keanu met Walker's eyes and said quietly, "Thank you, Sergeant. I only want to help those who have been forgotten. If there's a way to do this better within the law, I'm willing to learn and adapt." Walker's expression grew serious but encouraging. That's a good place to start. Compassion and legality don't have to be at odds. I hope we can find a path that respects both. The night air seemed lighter as the officers began to prepare to wrap up their inspection. Though the mission was still under scrutiny, the tone had shifted from confrontation to conversation. For Keanu, the evening had been a trial by fire, but it was also a testament to the power of quiet kindness in the face of suspicion. The encounter with Sergeant Walker marked a pivotal moment where understanding began to bridge the gap between law enforcement and humanitarian action. As the sergeant moved away to confer with his team, Keanu stood quietly, heart steady but full of cautious hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the first steps toward mutual respect and collaboration had been taken. The mission to bring warmth, food, and dignity to those in need would continue, strengthened by the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, compassion could shine through. After the thorough inspection and the sergeant's initial review, Sergeant Walker and Keanu Reeves found a quieter spot away from the gathered officers and flashing lights. The night air was cool, and the street was hushed once more. They stood, side by side, the weight of the evening hanging heavily between them. Sergeant Walker broke the silence first. "Mr. Reeves, I have to admit, situations like these are complicated. Homelessness isn't just a law enforcement issue, but a societal one. It's clear you care, deeply. But I wonder, how do you see your work fitting into the larger picture?" Keanu took a moment to consider. "Thank you, Sergeant. I believe that while financial donations and formal charities are important, they often miss something essential: the human connection. People aren't just numbers or problems to solve. They're individuals with stories, needs, and dignity." Walker nodded slowly. "That's something we struggle with. Police officers are trained to enforce laws, maintain order, and respond to emergencies. But dealing with homelessness often involves confronting complex social issues, mental health, addiction, poverty. We can't arrest our way out of it." Keanu's eyes reflected a quiet empathy. "Exactly. That's why I try to engage directly. I visit the people I help. I listen to them, learn their names and their stories. It builds trust. It shows them they're not invisible, not forgotten. That personal engagement can make a real difference." Walker sighed, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We get calls almost daily, complaints about vagrancy, petty theft, disturbances. But no matter how many arrests or patrols, the root problems persist. It's frustrating because enforcement alone doesn't solve the underlying issues." Keanu nodded in understanding. "It's the same in charity. Giving money or supplies is valuable, but without connection, it can feel transactional, like a bandage on a wound that needs deeper care. Direct involvement lets people know someone cares, that they have worth beyond their circumstances." The sergeant looked thoughtful. "Your approach sounds like it could complement what law enforcement does, addressing root causes rather than just symptoms." Keanu's gaze was steady. "That's the hope. If we can work together, law enforcement supporting outreach efforts that build trust and provide basic needs. We can create safer communities and restore dignity. Walker smiled faintly. It's an idea worth exploring. We need solutions that go beyond citations and patrols. The night held a fragile promise, a shared understanding between two men from different worlds, united by a desire to make a difference. The conversation deepened as Sergeant Walker and Keanu Reeves stood quietly, exchanging insights under the dim glow of a street lamp. The city's challenges loomed large, but for a brief moment, hope flickered in the honest dialogue between them. Walker leaned slightly forward, voice measured. One of the hardest parts for us is building trust. Many homeless individuals fear police involvement. They're wary, sometimes hostile, because past experiences have been negative. Keanu nodded in agreement. Trust takes time and consistency. That's why I visit regularly, not just to hand out supplies, but to listen. When people feel heard, they're more open to support. It's not just about meeting immediate needs, but about rebuilding their sense of self. The sergeant glanced around, then lowered his voice. Sometimes, our officers encounter situations where individuals don't want help or refuse services. It's frustrating and heartbreaking. It is, Keanu said softly, but that's why compassion is so important. You can't force someone to accept help, but you can show up consistently without judgment. Over time, that presence can change lives. Walker reflected on the scope of law enforcement's resources. We have limited personnel and time. Often, our focus is on responding to calls and enforcing laws, not on outreach or long-term support. Keanu understood. That's why partnerships matter. Outreach programs, healthcare providers, volunteers. We all have roles. But it's crucial that these efforts include personal engagement. People need to know there's someone who cares beyond systems and rules. The sergeant's eyes softened. Your mission goes beyond supplies. It's about dignity, respect, and community. Keanu smiled gently. Exactly. When you treat someone as a person, not a problem, you create change. It's not just charity, it's humanity. Walker nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to see more collaboration between law enforcement and humanitarian efforts like yours. It could reduce petty crime, improve community safety, and offer real support. Keanu's voice was hopeful. When basic needs are met, food, shelter, medical care, people don't have to resort to desperation. Communities become safer and stronger. The two men shared a moment of silent agreement. Their conversation was a bridge between worlds, a glimpse of what could be when compassion and justice work hand in hand. As the night deepened, Sergeant Walker and Keanu Reeves continued their candid discussion about the complexities of homelessness and societal neglect. The street around them was quiet, the tension from earlier moments easing into a thoughtful dialogue. Walker admitted, "We often feel overwhelmed. The issues are so deep-rooted: mental health, addiction, poverty. It's easy to feel like we're just putting out fires, never truly solving the problems." Keanu nodded. It's a challenge for everyone involved, but small, consistent actions can make a difference, one person's life at a time. The sergeant's voice softened. Your direct, personal approach is inspiring. I think we could learn from it. Our goal is to keep communities safe, but safety means more than just enforcement. It means addressing the causes of instability. Keanu agreed. When people have food, warmth, and someone who cares, they're less likely to engage in petty crime or disturbances. It's about creating stability. Walker looked hopeful. If law enforcement worked more closely with community programs like yours, maybe we could reduce emergency calls and help more people sustainably. Keanu smiled. That's the dream. Collaboration, understanding, shared goals. It's how real change happens. The two men stood quietly, the night embracing their shared commitment. The barriers between their roles actor and sergeant, civilian and officer, seemed to fade, replaced by a mutual respect and a vision for a better future. Their conversation was a testament to the power of dialogue and compassion, a beacon in the dark for a city grappling with challenges that required more than quick fixes. As they prepared to rejoin the others and conclude the night's events, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. This mission, though tested and scrutinized, was alive and growing. With allies like Sergeant Walker and a community willing to listen, there was hope that the quiet work of kindness could spark lasting change. As the night progressed, the tone among the officers began to shift. What had started as suspicion and caution was slowly turning into something closer to understanding and respect. One by one, the officers examined the supplies in the SUV with a growing sense of appreciation. Officer Stevens carefully lifted a sleeping bag from the back seat. "This is good quality," he remarked, feeling the thickness of the insulation and the durable stitching. "Rated for extreme cold. Most of these people must be facing harsh conditions." Keanu nodded quietly. "They do. Many spend nights outdoors in freezing temperatures. These sleeping bags can mean the difference between life and death." Another officer unwrapped a box filled with nutritious, non-perishable food. Cans of beans, soups, and high-protein snacks were neatly packed, clearly chosen with care. "This isn't just any food," remarked Officer Martinez. "It's selected for sustenance and shelf life." Keanu's eyes reflected a quiet pride. "I've learned what works best from those I visit. It's about giving them what they need to survive, not just whatever's convenient." The hygiene kits were next, filled with essentials like soap, toothbrushes, toothpaste, and feminine products. The officers noted the completeness and thoughtful packaging. "This shows real care," said Officer Ramirez. "Not just basic supplies, but things that help maintain dignity." Sergeant Walker, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward and spoke with measured admiration. "Mr. Reeves, it's clear you put a great deal of thought into every package. This isn't just charity. It's a labor of love." Keanu shook his head modestly. "It's simple, really. These people have been forgotten. This is my way of reminding them that they matter, that they're not invisible." The officers exchanged glances, the skepticism that had once branded the cargo as suspicious now dissolving in the light of Keanu's genuine concern. Sergeant Walker picked up a carefully labeled box and turned it in his hands, inspecting the neat handwriting on the side. "You know these people personally?" he asked, glancing up at Keanu with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Keanu nodded, his voice soft but steady. "Yes, I do. Over the months, I've gotten to know many of them by name. I visit them regularly, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to listen, sometimes to deliver supplies they need most. It's important to me that they know they're not just recipients of aid, but people who matter." Walker's gaze lingered on the box. "Most charitable efforts are much less personal. They operate on a larger scale, more bureaucratic. What you're doing here is rare. It makes all the difference," Keanu replied simply. "When you hand someone a package with their name on it, with a note reminding them they're not forgotten, it's not just charity, it's respect. It's restoring dignity to people who often feel invisible." Officer Ramirez, standing nearby, nodded slowly. "The quality of these supplies speaks volumes too. Thermal blankets, high-grade sleeping bags, nutritious food. They're not just thrown together. This is thoughtful, tailored help." Keanu's eyes dropped briefly. "I choose each item carefully. I've learned what really helps from the people I visit. For some, it's warm socks or gloves. For others, it's medical supplies or hygiene products. It's not about quantity. It's about meeting real needs." Another officer added, "It's clear this takes a lot of time and money." Keanu shook his head modestly. "It's funded by donations and volunteers who believe in this approach. I manage it all personally because I want to make sure the help goes directly to those who need it without red tape or delay." The humility in his voice was unmistakable. The officers looked at him not just as a celebrity, but as someone deeply committed to making a difference in the lives of others. The initial suspicion about the cargo began to fade, replaced by admiration for the care and dedication behind it. Sergeant Walker spoke thoughtfully. When people feel seen and respected, they're more likely to accept help, to trust others, and even to make positive changes in their lives. Keanu smiled faintly, a quiet glow of hope in his eyes. That's why personal engagement matters so much. It's not just what you give, but how you show you care. The officers exchanged knowing glances. This late-night inspection had unexpectedly become a lesson in humanity and compassion. The street outside remained quiet as the officers wrapped up their inspection, the weight of the evening settling into a sense of respect. Sergeant Walker approached Keanu once more, his demeanor now thoughtful rather than suspicious. "Mr. Reeves," he began, "your dedication is commendable. What you're doing goes beyond typical charity. It addresses a fundamental human need, being seen, valued, and cared for." Keanu shook his head gently. "I don't see it as anything extraordinary, just a way to remind people that they matter, even when society forgets them." Walker smiled softly. "Sometimes the simplest acts carry the greatest weight." The officers gathered their notes and began to prepare to leave, the mood significantly lighter than when the night had begun. The flashing lights, the scrutiny, the doubts, all softened by the undeniable evidence of genuine compassion. Keanu watched them go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The mission was far from over, but this night had validated what he already knew, that kindness, humility, and personal connection could break down walls and inspire change. As he closed the SUV's doors and prepared to continue his journey, Keanu carried with him a quiet hope. The supplies were more than packages. They were symbols of humanity, bridges between forgotten lives and the possibility of dignity. The night had tested his resolve, but it had also strengthened it. With respect gained and understanding growing, the path forward was clearer. Keanu drove away, ready to return to those who waited. Each delivery was a step toward healing, a promise that no one was truly alone. After hours of inspection, discussion, and reflection, Sergeant Walker gathered the officers for a final briefing. The night's tension had slowly shifted, and the air was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Sergeant Walker addressed the group with the authority and calm that comes from years of experience. "Everyone, I appreciate the thorough work done tonight," he began. After reviewing the supplies, the notes, and Mr. Reeves's explanations, it's clear this is a genuine humanitarian effort, not an illegal operation. The officers nodded, some visibly relieved. The heavy suspicion that had hung over the night was lifting. Walker turned to Keanu, who stood quietly nearby, his posture composed but exhausted from the ordeal. "Mr. Reeves, we will not be pursuing any charges related to the cargo. Your cooperation and transparency have been noted." Keanu allowed himself a small breath of relief. "Thank you, Sergeant." Walker continued. "Regarding the speeding violation, you will receive a warning. Given the circumstances and the importance of your mission, we are choosing to exercise discretion." The officers exchanged glances, understanding the significance of this decision. It was more than just leniency. It was recognition of the impact of Keanu's work. Walker stepped closer to Keanu. "I want to invite you to share your approach and methods with our department. There is much we can learn from how you build trust and deliver aid directly to vulnerable populations." Keanu's eyes brightened slightly. "I would be honored to help in any way I can." The sergeant smiled. "Collaboration between community members and law enforcement is key to making lasting change. Your experience can help us improve how we support those in need." Officer Ramirez added, "We've seen firsthand how personal engagement can build bridges. We want to explore how we can work together to address root causes rather than just symptoms." The mood among the officers was one of genuine interest and respect. The night had transformed from confrontation to opportunity. Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the challenges faced, this was a moment of progress, a step toward greater understanding and partnership. As the conversation deepened, Sergeant Walker took time to emphasize the broader challenges facing the community. We recognize that homelessness is a complex issue that requires more than enforcement. It demands compassion, patience, and cooperation. Keanu nodded in agreement. I've seen that firsthand. When people feel respected and cared for, they're more open to support and change. That's why I focus on building relationships. Walker looked thoughtful. Many officers struggle with how to approach these situations. We often respond to crises but lack the resources for sustained outreach. Keanu smiled gently. That's where partnerships can make a difference. When law enforcement works alongside volunteers and healthcare providers, we can create a safety net that's both humane and effective. Officer Stevens spoke up. Your work demonstrates that. It's inspiring to see someone go beyond donations to form real connections. The sergeant nodded. This kind of direct engagement helps reduce petty crime and emergency calls by addressing underlying needs. Keanu's voice was steady. When people have food, warmth, and someone who listens, they're less likely to resort to survival tactics that cause trouble. It's about restoring dignity. Walker looked toward the gathered officers. We should consider training programs based on these principles. We want officers to understand the human stories behind the calls. Keanu added, I'm willing to assist with that. Sharing stories and experiences can build empathy. The officers agreed enthusiastically. The night's events had sparked a new vision for community policing, one rooted in respect and collaboration. Keanu felt grateful for this openness. It was a sign that change was possible, and that, together, they could make a real impact. As the evening wore on and the officers began to wrap up their work, Sergeant Walker stepped forward once again, extending his hand toward Keanu with a sincerity that felt genuine after the long night of questions and inspections. Mr. Reeves, I want to personally thank you for your patience and your openness tonight. This mission of yours, what you're doing, it's difficult, it's necessary, and it's clear you're truly committed. Keanu met his gaze and returned the handshake firmly, his voice steady but humble. Thank you, Sergeant. I'm grateful for your willingness to listen and to understand. It's been a difficult night, but if it leads to greater awareness and cooperation, then it's worth it. Officer Ramirez nodded in agreement as he approached. From what we've seen, your dedication goes beyond what most people would expect. We respect that. It's inspiring to witness someone take such a hands-on approach to helping people who are often forgotten. Walker gestured toward the quiet street bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, now free of the flashing emergency lights that had lit up the night earlier. The warning for the speeding violation is a small matter in the grand scheme of things. We recognize the importance of your work, and tonight's events have only reinforced that. Keanu gave a small, appreciative smile, his heart lighter despite the exhaustion of the evening. I'm glad. Every minute I spend out there, every package I deliver, it's all for the people who are often overlooked. Walker's tone grew more serious yet hopeful. This night has been a turning point. The conversations, the inspection, they've opened up possibilities for law enforcement and community members like yourself to work together more closely. He paused for a moment, then continued. I want to formally invite you to share your methods, your experiences with our department. There's a lot we can learn from your personal engagement approach. How to build trust, how to connect on a human level rather than just enforcing laws. Keanu's eyes brightened at the offer. I would be honored to do that. If sharing what I've learned can help make our communities safer and more compassionate, I'm ready. Officer Stevens added, we often see the challenges our officers face on the streets. Resistance, mistrust, repeated calls for the same issues. Your approach could help break that cycle. The sergeant nodded thoughtfully. Collaboration is key. Together we can address the root causes of many problems, not just the symptoms. As the officers began gathering their equipment and preparing to leave, the mood was markedly different from the tense start of the night. Respect and understanding had replaced suspicion. Keanu looked around at the quiet street, the city's humres resuming its normal rhythm. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission was far from over, but tonight had shown that compassion, humility, and persistence could bridge divides. Driving away with the remaining supplies secured in the SUV, Keanu thought of the individuals who would receive them. Their names no longer just written on notes, but spoken aloud in recognition and hope. The night's trials had tested him, but they had also strengthened his resolve. With the promise of partnership from law enforcement and a community willing to listen, the path forward was brighter. Keanu knew the journey ahead would require patience and persistence, but the turning point had come. One conversation, one connection, one shared understanding at a time. As the city lights blurred past, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his SUV, reflecting on the long night behind him. The tension and scrutiny he'd faced lingered in his mind. It struck him how easy it was for good intentions to be misread, especially when those intentions involved helping people society often chooses to ignore. He thought about the moment the officers first saw the cargo, how suspicion immediately colored their reactions. It was a reminder that charity, especially one as personal and unconventional as his, could sometimes be met with doubt rather than gratitude. Keanu knew this all too well. Over the months of delivering supplies, he had encountered misunderstanding not just from strangers, but sometimes even from those closest to him. Family and friends struggled to grasp why he devoted so much time to people living on the edge, people society pushed to the margins. The emotional toll was real. The quiet sacrifices, missed dinners, late nights, endless planning, added up. But what weighed heaviest was the feeling of invisibility that hung over those he helped. It was as if society had written them off, leaving them alone to survive. Yet Keanu's resilience never faltered. In the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, he found strength in the small moments, the grateful smiles, the heartfelt thanks, the brief connections that reminded him why the work mattered. He thought about Harold and Maria, about the handwritten notes that had softened the officer's suspicion. Those personal touches were more than just words. They were lifelines, threads of hope in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. The officers' changed attitudes gave Keanu hope too. Their willingness to listen, to learn, and to consider a different perspective symbolized a possibility for greater understanding between community helpers and law enforcement. He realized that bridging this gap was vital, not just for his mission, but for the well-being of the city's most vulnerable. Trust had to be built on both sides, through patience, empathy, and open hearts. As the SUV rolled forward into the night, Keanu resolved to keep moving, to keep delivering care, dignity, and hope. The obstacles were many, but so was the need. The hours that followed were a quiet journey through the city's sleeping neighborhoods. Keanu's thoughts drifted to the countless individuals he had met, each with a story of hardship, resilience, and longing for connection. He reflected on the misunderstandings that often shadowed his work, how easily charity could be mistaken for something else entirely, how judgment came swiftly when society saw only the surface, without understanding the depth of need beneath. Rajanita. The emotional weight was something he carried silently. Nights spent alone, planning, doubts whispered by others. The pressure of public scrutiny that could turn private kindness into public controversy. But through it all, Keanu's determination remained steadfast. Each package delivered was a quiet act of rebellion against indifference, a statement that every life mattered, no matter how invisible it seemed. He thought about the officers who had once viewed his supplies with suspicion, but now regarded his mission with respect. That transformation embodied a larger hope, that prejudice could be overcome by understanding and barriers broken by dialogue. Keanu knew that change would not come overnight. The path was long, filled with challenges and setbacks. But moments like this, when suspicion gave way to admiration, were proof that progress was possible. He was reminded that his work was more than logistics or supplies. It was about humanity, about standing with those society had forgotten and reminding them they were not alone. The night was a testament to resilience, not just his own, but the resilience of every person struggling to survive, to be seen, to be heard. Keanu's quiet strength was fueled by these connections, by the belief that compassion could pierce even the darkest misunderstandings. He was ready to continue, undeterred by the obstacles, driven by the hope that kindness could create change. As dawn approached, the city slowly stirred awake. Keanu's SUV rolled toward its next stop, carrying not just supplies, but the weight of a mission tested by doubt and strengthened by hope. He reflected on the officers' changed attitudes, how their skepticism had softened into genuine respect. It was a sign that bridges could be built between community helpers and law enforcement, that collaboration was possible. Keanu understood that this shift was fragile, requiring ongoing effort from all sides. Trust wasn't given freely. It was earned through consistent action, transparency, and empathy. He thought about the conversations with Sergeant Walker, the promise of sharing methods and working together. It was a new chapter, one that could transform not just his mission, but the city's approach to its most vulnerable residents. The night's trials had revealed the harsh realities of carrying out charitable work under public suspicion, the emotional toll, the personal sacrifice, the constant need to prove one's intentions. Yet it had also illuminated the quiet power of resilience, the strength found in continuing despite obstacles, the courage to stand for those without a voice. Keanu's humility shone through. He saw himself not as a hero, but as a messenger. Someone reminding forgotten people that they mattered, that their dignity was worth protecting. The officers' changed attitudes symbolized hope, a hope that with understanding, compassion, and cooperation, the barriers between community helpers and law enforcement could be broken down. As the sun rose, casting light over the city, Keanu felt a renewed determination. The mission would continue, stronger and more connected than ever. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are fought not in the streets, but in the hearts and minds of those willing to listen and change. The morning sun was just beginning to rise as Sergeant Walker gathered his team in a quiet conference room at the precinct. The events of the previous night lingered in their minds, a mixture of surprise, respect, and a new sense of purpose. The sergeant addressed the officers with a calm but resolute tone. "Last night was more than just a routine traffic stop," Walker began. "It was a wake-up call. We witnessed firsthand a different way of reaching out to the homeless community, one based on trust, respect, and personal connection." The officers nodded, many reflecting on how their perceptions had shifted during the inspection of the supplies and notes. What once seemed suspicious had become clearly an act of compassion and dedication. Walker continued, "We need to rethink how we approach these issues. Enforcement alone isn't enough. We need outreach programs that build relationships, provide real support, and foster cooperation." Officer Ramirez added, "What Mr. Reeves showed us is that personal engagement can break down barriers. If we could integrate that approach into our work, we might reduce conflicts and improve outcomes." Walker nodded thoughtfully. "That's why I'm proposing we partner with Mr. Reeves. He's agreed to help us train officers in building trust, delivering aid, and approaching vulnerable populations without intimidation." The room buzzed with quiet excitement. The idea of combining official resources with Keanu's grassroots approach represented a hopeful future. Walker looked at his team and said, "This partnership won't solve everything overnight, but it's a start. Together, We can create safer communities and restore dignity to those who need it most. Later that day, Keanu met with Sergeant Walker and several officers to discuss the practical details of the partnership. They sat around a conference table, papers and plans spread before them. The atmosphere was one of collaboration and shared commitment. Keanu spoke earnestly. "I'm ready to share everything I've learned. How to approach people with empathy, how to build trust, and how to deliver aid in a way that respects their dignity." Walker nodded. "Your insights are invaluable. Many officers want to help but don't know the best way. Training from someone with your experience can make a real difference." Officer Stevens chimed in. "It's about changing mindsets as much as methods. We need to see the people behind the problem." Keanu agreed. "Exactly. When you treat someone as a person first, it changes everything. It opens doors for dialogue and support." They discussed strategies for integrating Keanu's approach into existing outreach programs, identifying areas where law enforcement could better collaborate with community organizations and healthcare providers. Walker emphasized, "We'll need to start small, pilot programs in targeted neighborhoods, measure impact, gather feedback, and refine our approach." Keanu smiled, hopeful. "Step by step, we can build something meaningful." The conversation turned to logistics, training schedules, communication channels, and resources. The officers were eager to learn and to make a positive impact. By the end of the meeting, a tentative partnership had been forged, a bridge between official authority and grassroots compassion, between enforcement and empathy. The scene was set for a new chapter in community safety, one where collaboration and respect could create lasting change. As the meeting drew to a close, Sergeant Walker stood and extended his hand to Keanu with genuine warmth and gratitude. "Thank you for your willingness to work with us. This partnership signals more than just a new program. It's a beacon of hope, not only for the people we serve, but for all of us who dedicate ourselves to making a difference." Keanu grasped the sergeant's hand firmly, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Thank you, Sergeant. It means a lot to know we're taking these steps together. Change isn't easy, but with collaboration and persistence, I truly believe we can make a lasting impact." Officer Ramirez, standing nearby, smiled as he spoke up, his tone reflecting pride and optimism. "I'm proud to be part of this. It's a chance for us to transform how we engage with the community, to move from enforcement to partnership, from suspicion to understanding. This is what real progress looks like." Sergeant Walker looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each officer. "Remember, this is about more than policy and procedure. It's about humanity. It's about compassion, respect, and seeing the individuals behind every call or complaint. It's about restoring dignity where it's been stripped away." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly right. Every person deserves to be treated with kindness. When officers approach people as human beings first, everything changes. Trust is built, doors open, and healing begins." The officers took in those words, the weight of the message sinking in. The challenges ahead were clear. Complex social issues, resource limitations, and ingrained attitudes would take time to overcome, but the potential for meaningful change now felt within reach. As the group began to disperse, the morning sun cast a warm glow through the windows, illuminating the faces filled with hope and determination. The city outside was waking, unaware that a small but powerful alliance had formed within its walls, one that might reshape the future for its most vulnerable residents. Keanu took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The mission he'd quietly carried for months had sparked something bigger than himself. He was no longer alone on the road. Together with these officers, he would walk a new path, one paved with understanding, respect, and shared purpose. With renewed resolve, Keanu prepared to continue his work. The supplies in his SUV were not just material goods. They were symbols of compassion, bridges between forgotten lives, and the possibility of hope. The night's trials had tested him, but they had also strengthened him. The partnership forged tonight was a foundation, a promise that kindness and safety could coexist. As he left the precinct and drove back into the waking city, Keanu felt the quiet power of this new beginning. It was a chance to prove that even in a world of doubt and division, humanity could prevail. Together, they would build a community where safety and compassion walked hand in hand, one connection at a time, one life touched with dignity and care. After the tense but hopeful encounter with law enforcement, Keanu Reeves felt a renewed sense of purpose as he resumed his journey through the quiet streets of Los Angeles. The night air was cool, and the city's pulse slowed in these early hours, but for Keanu, the mission was as urgent as ever. His SUV rolled silently through familiar neighborhoods, places where the city's most vulnerable found brief respite from the cold and chaos. He had a list, a carefully compiled map of names, locations, and needs that guided his nightly rounds. At his first stop, he spotted Harold, the veteran he'd met months ago. Harold was curled up in the corner of a parking lot, wrapped in a worn coat. His face tired, but lit with recognition when Keanu approached. Keanu opened the back door and handed Harold a package. Inside were a thick sleeping bag, warm socks, a can of soup, and a handwritten note. Harold's eyes filled with gratitude. "You always come through, brother," he whispered. They shared a quiet moment, a connection beyond words, a reminder of the dignity and humanity Keanu sought to restore. Driving away, Keanu's mind drifted to earlier encounters. Flashbacks surfaced. The time he helped a young mother find warm clothing for her child. The day he spent listening to an older woman's stories, validating her life beyond the label of homelessness. These memories fueled his resolve. Each package was more than supplies. It was a message of hope, a promise that someone cared. As he continued his route, Keanu felt the weight of the night's earlier challenges lessen. The partnership with law enforcement had opened doors, but the heart of the mission remained personal. One delivery, one conversation, one life at a time. Keanu's journey continued deeper into the city's quiet neighborhoods. His next stop was Maria's usual resting spot, a small alcove beneath the overpass where she sought shelter from the cold wind. When she saw him approaching, her tired eyes brightened with recognition, and a faint smile touched her lips despite the hardship etched on her face. Keanu gently handed her the package he carried, a bundle carefully assembled with hygiene essentials, non-perishable food, and a warm blanket. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "Maria, you're stronger than you know. Keep fighting." They spoke briefly, words soft and sincere, about the struggles she faced and the flickers of hope she held on to. Maria shared stories of lost family and dreams deferred, but also a desire to rebuild and find stability. For her, these visits were more than charity. They were moments of connection and validation, reminders that someone saw her as a person worthy of care and kindness. Keanu listened attentively, offering encouragement and compassion. As he drove away, the image of Maria's resilient spirit lingered in his mind, fueling his resolve. The mission wasn't just about delivering supplies. It was about restoring humanity to those whom society often dismissed. Passing familiar landmarks, Keanu thought about the others on his list. Thomas, who battled addiction while trying to stay warm. James, an older man coping with loneliness and illness. Each stop was a thread woven into the larger tapestry of the community he served. Flashbacks to earlier nights surfaced. Thomas' tears of gratitude when given medication that eased his suffering. James's quiet smile upon receiving a warm meal and a note reminding him he was not alone. These memories grounded Keanu's work in real human impact. Though the nights were long and sometimes discouraging, these moments of connection underscored the purpose and power of compassion. They were reminders that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives and slowly transforming perceptions. Word was spreading quietly. The once hidden mission was becoming known in hushed conversations among volunteers, shelter workers, and even some city residents who began to see the quiet hero behind the nightly visits. Though he worked mostly alone, Keanu felt the growing support, a network of people inspired by the mission's humility and heart. The community's recognition, while not loud or public, was deeply meaningful. These quiet victories reinforced his commitment. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but the path was illuminated by the trust and hope he nurtured in every interaction. As the night waned and the first hints of dawn tinged the horizon, Keanu's journey pressed on. Each new delivery brought fresh stories, faces, and hopes. The city's shadows were filled with lives longing to be acknowledged, and Keanu moved quietly among them, a bearer of warmth and care. The impact of his mission was becoming tangible, not just in the grateful smiles or the whispered thank yous, but in the slowly shifting attitudes of the community. People who once ignored or feared the homeless began to notice the difference one person's compassion could make. Neighbors who had turned away were now curious, watching as Keanu handed out supplies with humility and respect. Local shelter workers reached out, offering to collaborate, inspired by his personal approach. Even the officers who had questioned him the night before were beginning to see the value in this quiet heroism. Their changed attitudes symbolized a bridge, a fragile but hopeful connection between law enforcement and the community's most vulnerable. Keanu's mission was not about recognition or fame. It was about restoring dignity where it had been stripped away. Each package delivered, each conversation shared, was a reaffirmation that every life mattered. The handwritten notes, carefully penned and tucked inside each package, had become symbols of hope. They carried messages of strength, encouragement, and the simple truth that no one was forgotten. The city was slowly awakening to the reality that true heroism often comes without fanfare, in quiet acts of kindness, in personal connections, and in the willingness to stand for those who have no voice. Keanu's heart swelled with quiet pride, knowing that despite the obstacles and misunderstandings, the mission endured. It was a testament to the power of empathy and the resilience of the human spirit. As the sun rose, casting a golden light over the city, Keanu prepared for another night, another round, another chance to bring hope and warmth to those who needed it most. The community was beginning to recognize the quiet hero behind these nightly missions, one who gave not just supplies, but a reminder of humanity's enduring kindness. And that recognition was just the beginning. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his SUV, parked at the edge of a dimly lit park. The night air was cool and still. The city's distant hum softened into a gentle background. His mind wandered back to the evening's unexpected events: the traffic stop, the cautious scrutiny, and the eventual transformation from suspicion to understanding. It had been a test, one that challenged not just his resolve, but the way the world sees those who choose to help quietly. The packages in his car, once mistaken for something suspicious, had become symbols of hope and compassion by night's end. The handwritten notes, the careful selection of supplies, and his personal visits had spoken louder than any doubts or fears. Keanu reflected on the moment Sergeant Walker had offered not just a warning, but a hand of partnership, a recognition that kindness and law enforcement could work together. It was a rare and hopeful turning point. He thought about the people waiting for those packages, the veterans, the mothers, the elderly, the lonely, each with a story, a struggle, and a need to be seen. His mission was more than charity. It was a reminder of humanity in a world often blind to suffering. In the quiet of the night, Keanu understood something profound. True service often happens beyond the spotlight, unseen and uncelebrated. It is driven not by fame or recognition, but by empathy, respect, and a deep commitment to others. This mission was not about himself, but about those whose dignity society had overlooked. It was about reaching out when no one else would, offering warmth, food, and the most vital gift: acknowledgement. Keanu's heart swelled with quiet hope. The night's challenges had strengthened his purpose, reminding him that even the smallest acts of compassion could ripple outward, changing lives in ways unseen. As dawn approached, he prepared to continue, driven by the belief that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and cared for. The city began to stir as Keanu started his engine, the first light casting soft shadows across the streets. His thoughts remained on the journey, the faces, and the lessons learned. Lightning lit. He thought about the power of direct compassion, the simple act of showing up, listening, and caring, without judgment or expectation. It was a practice that transcended statistics and policies, reaching into the heart of human connection. Keanu knew that many who walked the streets were invisible to most. They were the forgotten, the ignored, the marginalized. Yet, in each encounter, he saw resilience, hope, and the spark of humanity waiting to be acknowledged. He reflected on the officers' changed attitudes, the way suspicion had given way to respect, and the beginning of collaboration. It was proof that understanding could grow when people were willing to listen and learn. Keanu believed that society often measures service by visibility, by how many people know your name or see your actions. But true service is quieter. It happens in the shadows, in moments of kindness that may never be recorded or praised. It is found in the warmth of a blanket handed to a shivering veteran, in the gentle encouragement written on a note, in the simple presence of someone who cares. As Keanu drove through the awakening city, he imagined a future where more people embraced this kind of compassion, where communities came together to support their most vulnerable. He hoped that viewers would be inspired to see beyond appearances, to recognize the humanity in everyone, and to find their own ways to help those who have been forgotten. The power of empathy, he knew, was limitless. Keanu pulled his SUV to a quiet, dimly lit corner of the city where a small group of people were beginning their day. He stepped out into the cool morning air, carrying a fresh package in his hands. His movements were calm, deliberate, and filled with the same humility and care that had defined every step of his mission. One by one, he approached each individual with respect and kindness. He handed out supplies, warm blankets, nutritious food, hygiene kits, and shared quiet moments of connection. He listened intently to their stories, their fears, and their hopes. These were not just transactions of aid, but meaningful exchanges that honored their dignity and humanity. The sun was rising, casting a soft, golden glow over the streets and buildings. The city was waking, but many still lived on the margins, unseen and unheard. Keanu's presence in that moment was a beacon, an unspoken message that they mattered, that they were not forgotten. He paused, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of the journey behind him and the path still ahead. The trials of the night, the traffic stop, the scrutiny, all had tested his resolve. Yet each challenge had strengthened his belief in the quiet power of compassion. Turning slightly, Keanu spoke softly, as if addressing those watching the story unfold. Sometimes, the greatest acts of service happen without notice. They happen in the shadows, away from cameras and applause. They happen when we choose to see one another not as problems or statistics, but as human beings deserving of respect. His voice carried a gentle urgency. When we reach out with kindness and empathy, we open doors to healing and hope. We remind each other that no one is truly alone. Keanu's mission was not about fame or recognition. It was about restoring dignity to those whom society too often overlooks. Each package, each note, each conversation was a thread woven into a tapestry of hope, a testament to the enduring strength of human connection. As the video draws to a close, the message lingers, a call to action for viewers. It is an invitation to look beyond the surface, to find ways to help those forgotten, and to be a source of light in someone's darkness. Because in the end, it is these unseen moments of humanity, these quiet acts of compassion, that build a better world. Keanu paused, a final thought hanging in the air. We all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small. It starts with seeing the humanity in everyone and acting with a heart full of empathy and respect. With that, he smiled softly and turned back toward the people waiting, ready to continue the mission, one connection at a time, one life touched with kindness and hope.